Partly because there is also an infectious pestilence that is raging in the city, if you can imagine a disease making people mad. Now, there are some people who are self-quarantining, but some apparently are tired of being cooped up, and they're on their way to a party, not at number 10 Downing Street, as it turns out. Some of these people are wearing masks, and some of them are not, and a fight breaks out between the people who are wearing masks and the people who are not. Again, if you can imagine such a thing. It is, however, a masquerade party, so masks are kind of mandatory. And we meet one young man, the Romeo of the title, who is in love. And who is he in love with? He is in love with a girl named Rosaline, because he hasn't met the other one yet. And suddenly, in the course of the week, the boy meets a new girl. The boy falls in love with a new girl. They marry secretly. Her cousin kills his best friend, so the boy kills the cousin. He gets banished. The girl pretends to die. The boy comes back, and then now the boy has to kill the fiancée that the girl's father wanted her to marry in the first place. But the boy doesn't know that her death is fake, so he kills himself just as the girl wakes up to find out she's a widow, and she can't marry her second choice because he's dead there in the crypt too, so she kills herself. Sorry, I should have said spoiler alert. They both die. But they also go on to become the best known and most beloved love story in all of Western literature. And I have to ask myself, how? How does this become the paragon of paradigms for a pair of paramours? You have to wonder. Because whether or not we've seen or ever read this play, we know the story. We know so many quotes from it. A plague of both your... It is the East and Juliet is the... See, we know this play. You sun is the sun. Some of us know this play better than others. And at the same time, as much as we love this play, there are many people in the world who hate it. With 6 A's, they hate it. And why? Well, partly because ever since the 1970s, we as a society kind of hate young people. We hate teenagers and adolescents, particularly those who seem to think that they know better what to do, like whether or not we should have gun control or what we should do about climate change, you know? Those kids, get off my lawn! But people also say that this play is unrealistic. And that's one of their reasons for hating it. And I have to say, have they seen Shakespeare before? Hamlet gets told by a ghost, revenge my death, and so all of these people die. There are a guy in Scotland who kills a whole bunch of people who will return to him as ghosts because 3 witches tell him he's going to be the king. There are fairies who give a weaver the head of an ass. And in one play, there's a woman who pretends to be her own statue for years. How believable is this? But they say it's unbelievable because it happens too fast. They only know each other a day before they marry, and it all takes place in less than a week. It is too rash, too unadvised, too sudden, too like the lightning which doth cease to be ere one can say it lightens. And that's what the play has to say about the action, that it all does take place too fast. The play knows it all happens so quickly and too quickly. Look, a lot of us first encounter Shakespeare in the form of this play. It is the most commonly taught play in American high schools and middle schools. It's very often the first play that people will see or read. And when you have to read something for school, you're kind of less likely to enjoy it because it's forced on you. I have a novel from freshman English that I, to this day, despise. Mostly because I thought it was pretty juvenile even then. But if I see a copy of it in a bookstore, I will hide it so that no one can find it. I hate it that much. And Shakespeare, you know, it's got that old-timey language with the these and the thous and the poetry, and high school teachers love to tell you that when they first meet and fall in love, Romeo and Juliet share a sonnet in the course of their conversations. Like, oh yeah, love, poetry, If they just told you how many dirty jokes there are in this play, I think a lot more people would like it. Now, sidebar, I say that it's taught in American high schools. It's also banned in many, many American high schools. because of vulgar and explicit language. So somebody's getting the dirty jokes, or at least they know that they're dirty jokes, even if they don't get them. They say this play encourages teen sex. They say it glorifies teen suicide. The characters use drugs in the form of poisons, and they disregard parental authority. Banning happens a lot with Shakespeare plays in American schools. Hamlet, one of the greatest examples of a play in Western literature, is regarded as, in some schools, as verboten because it has sex and violence and obscene language. That Scottish play, the one it's bad luck to say the name of, starts with Mac. It was banned during the reign of King James I because it has witches in it. Therefore, it's naturally evil. King Lear, for many years, was also not performed during the reign of King George III because Lear goes mad, and it was out of sensitivity for King George III. As we know, there's also a play with the title The Madness of King George. He had his own mental issues because, of course, as we know, King George will send a fully armed battalion to remind you of his love. Also, those plays are banned in high schools today in America because of sex, violence, and obscene language. The entire works of Shakespeare, the entire works, are banned in China and Texas prisons. Yeah, you know, there's that play where there's that leader named Julius, and all the people get together and they stab him, they shiv him. You wouldn't want that happening to your warden, you know, in a prison. So they banned the works, just entirely. Incidentally, in Texas prisons, there are a few books that they have no reason to ban, including one by this guy named Hitler titled Mein Kampf, and also 2 books by David Duke, the former Grand Wizard of the KKK, are not banned. They have no reason to ban them. So they keep them on the shelves. Am I selling you on how good this play is yet? To me, I have to say, I think if you have a decent introduction to a play or a story, then you know that you can get a lot more out of it than there may seem to be on the surface with the violence or the teen suicide or any of the others. And if people need a good introduction to these plays, I'd be happy to go to China and travel to China and introduce it to people, you know. I'm free. To me, Shakespeare is comfort food. I started reading Shakespeare actually in elementary school and found the beauty of the stories and the language because it's so rich and it's so beautiful. Even though my friend Scott Huber, for whom these speakers' corner speeches are memorialized his life, he used to say that Shakespeare always wrote in cliches. Things you've heard 1,000 times before, like to be or not to be, or wild goose chase, which first occurs in the works of Shakespeare. In fact, actually, the first printed source we have for it is in this play, Wild Goose Chase. But there's comfort in cliches. And we've gone 2 years without having this festival, you know, without the joy of coming out here in the heat and the humidity. And listening to the ambulances go by and the helicopters go overhead, just to participate in the beauty of Shakespeare. And we've had very little theater at all because of a disease that spread very easily, and the Elizabethans went through that same thing. They had the plague, which had hit, and I'll touch more on that in just a moment, but it had hit very close to the early performances of this play. So I think if there's a plague going on, then you get a lot of comfort from going to a play about the plague. But there are also other things that were going on in the Elizabethan England about this time. You know that this is about 2 families, the Montagets and the Capulets. See, we know this play. We know the names of the characters. They've been fighting with each other for years. What if I told you it's actually been for centuries? that they had been fighting, because this story is based on an English version of a French tale based on an Italian ballad that touches on an 8th century story about a 3rd century family feud. Survey says. And also in the century just before Elizabeth, of course, there had been a great civil war that disrupted English life, the Wars of the Roses. And if you think a century is long enough for people to be able to get over a war, I have some statuary south of the Mason-Dixon line I'd like to interest you in. War disrupts our lives. There was also a contentious and long-running feud that took place in England between two families, the Danvers and the Longs, which reached its climax in 1594. And that's 2 years before the first published version of this play was made known. The Danvers and the Longs feud reached its climax in 1594, in fact, when they were having a duel, which was interrupted by a murder. Which I think, if you're going to interrupt a duel, what better way than with a murder in the course of it? They killed one of the people involved. The feud also involved William Cecil, Lord Burleigh, and Henry Wriothesley, the Earl of Southampton. And those, both of whom are intimately involved in the history of the Shakespeare plays, as well as the publication of the works of Shakespeare. Now, the deaths, of course, it's right there in the title, Tragedy of Romeo and Juliet, but the deaths are not the last thing that happens in this play. The last thing that happens, of course, is that the parents of the two families end the feud that has so outraged and enraged their family for so long. Maybe there's something that we could learn from people who take the deaths of their children seriously enough to put an end to things that would keep causing their deaths. This play is with us. It is with us to this day. And as I said, there had been outbreaks of the plague in London, but they had been in 1563 and in 1578 and in 1582 and 1592, and this play was first published in 1596, so this is all very close. In 1592, in fact, theaters had been closed for almost 2 years at that outbreak. So again, this play is really with us. As was said at the time too, the cause of plague is sin. If you look to it well, and the cause of sin are plays. Therefore, the cause of plagues are plays. So, congratulations. Characters in Shakespeare die from time to time, and worms eat them, but they don't die from plague. And yet, as much a part of the world, their world, as the plague was, it's rarely mentioned in the plays, but it is all over this play. It really achieves its spotlight. One of the best known quotes from this play is about that. It occurs as Mercutio dies, and he refers to both of the Montagues and the Capulets when he says, "A plague." Absolutely, and even more, it becomes part of the plot of the play. After Friar Lawrence makes Juliet's poison that won't actually kill her, he wants to get word to Romeo of his cunning plan. But when he arranges for another monk to get the word to Romeo, that monk cannot tell him because people suspect him of having been exposed to the plague, and so he is kept out. So as Hamlet says, the plague's the thing. No, it's the play's the thing. When I want to know what one of these Shakespeare plays is really about at base, I'll look at what words are used most frequently in the course of it. And it can come as no surprise that over 160 times in the course of this play, we hear the word love. Between them, Romeo and Juliet account for more than half of the times that that word is mentioned. Side note, because also when I was looking at the words that are used the most frequently, I found this. There's one character who says one word 7 times in this play. Romeo says the word goose, including wild goose chase. I don't think that has much significance, but it just entertained me to know that. Because, well, for one thing, my nieces used to say, their nickname for me was Kaka. You can get over that now. My nieces used to tell me, Kaka, you are silly as a goose. And I have to think, yes, I always want to be silly as a goose, especially now that I know that Romeo says it 7 times. But it's more than romantic love that these characters talk about. It's also about our hope that love truly can conquer all. And it does come to that, come to fruition in this play, because it's the love that ends the darkness of the feud. As if we didn't know this was going to happen, their feud is darkness, and Juliet is the sun, not the west. So there are all of these elements going on, all of these things that connect with us, because we still fight, we still love, we still have families. Sometimes we both love and fight with our families. And we see this story repeated again and again over time, retold in musical form in the Fantastics, and then in West Side Story, and then in West Side Story, because of the remake. And I've touched on a lot of the obvious things in this play, but I also want to give you a secret story that happens in the course of this play, and only the initiated are able to understand it. So, I initiate you all into knowledge. Look, story is about alchemy. Today, if we know anything about alchemy, it's likely that at one time man was searching for a way to turn lead into gold. What if I told you that might be a metaphor for the soul's transformation? Perhaps it's not intended to be literal, but it could be misunderstood by people who weren't initiated like you are now. In the Elizabethan era, alchemy was very important, particularly John Dee, who was court astrologer to Elizabeth I, and also an alchemist and a man who dealt with herbs, much as Friar Lawrence does. A base person, perhaps, could be turned into a gold standard once they achieve enlightenment. And the play goes along with this as its secret story. Early on in the play, Romeo says, I have a soul of lead, so stakes me to the ground and I cannot move. And he is unwieldy, slow, heavy, and pale as lead. But those are early references in the play. Lead doesn't get mentioned later on in the course of it. The text goes on actually to mention many of the other metals that are important in alchemy. When Juliet emerges at her window, we get to hear that the trees are tipped with silver, and there are musicians that we hear from who talk about their music having a silver sound, by which they mean they don't make a sound unless you give them silver. How many musicians does it take to perform a single piece of music? Just one. But they'll only practice it once. They won't actually perform it until you pay them. Of course, one of the primary metals in alchemy was also quicksilver, which features prominently in this play in a way you might not suspect. They thought that quicksilver exhibited very special qualities of being both a solid and a liquid, and therefore it was symbolic of both earth and of heaven. And this is demonstrated by the character whose name means quicksilver, or Mercury, as we know it, Mercutio. Ding, ding, ding. Bonus points in the front row. And the references to him, of course, end largely with his death. So Mercury, lead, Mercury, silver, all of these things pass away as it goes on. And ultimately it is promised that Romeo and Juliet will be remembered because of gold statues that will be made of them. Romeo literally being transmutated from having a soul of lead to being a gold statue. And thus begins the thing of the telling of their story, which becomes the important thing in ending the feud, because the story is what is able to transform us, the people who hear it. And certainly it's able to transform us into gold because we are the audience for this. And I think there's nothing more wonderful than live theater, because the people who are telling you the story and performing the story are right there in the same space with you. I happen to think that's really special in life. The stories can transform us into gold, because even in the violent delights of this play, we can find unlikely comforts. So, as the prince says at the end of this play, I urge you to go hence and have more talk of these things. And thank you very much for joining me down here. And a breeze kicks up at just the right moment for us all to enjoy it. And also, do you have any questions about the play? Yes?
I have a few questions. You're an awesome speaker. I think
That's my favorite question in the world. He says I'm an awesome speaker.
I mean, your bio said I think you're an actor or you're a professor also.
I am not. I'm just an actor, gadabout, playwright, storyteller.
A couple of quick questions. One is, what's the book that you wanted to ban by Poppy Pito?
Oh, the book that I hated in freshman English, A Separate Piece by John Knowles.
Okay.
Oi!